would you describe a perfect metal rhythm?
The rhythm of metal is a riff. That's why I love metal. The riffs get you crazy. That's metal for me. Metal appeals to your balls.
This one's called Hellbent's Full Leather.
It just sounded more evil.
Heavy metal thunder, baby.
A lot of the stuff that came out of England was metal's answer to punk.
The new wave of British heavy metal absolutely blew me into next week.
Oh, there's Eddie. It was overseas. It was the English hard rock.
Do you want to play your music loud or do you want to play it loud? All that stuff just jumps out and just goes bang right in your nuts.
Stay tuned for details.
Heavy, la historia del metal. Es difícil de creer que con cientos de millones de copias vendidas en las últimas 3 décadas, el heavy metal, a finales de los 70, se encontraba en su lecho de muerte. El mapa de carreteras que crearon Black Sabbath y Led Zeppelin tomó una abrupta desviación. La música disco se había vuelto una moda, y en el Reino Unido, el lugar de nacimiento del heavy metal, una creciente inquietud encendió un movimiento juvenil que puso al heavy metal al borde de su extinción.
Metal almost fizzled out, around the punk new wave era.
Punk was really an answer to like the dinosaur rock of the 70s. There was no new ideas. There was no new energy. It was almost becoming kind of a parody of itself.
Zeppelin, they'd be doing these 20-minute drum solos, and it got really yawningly boring.
It got very technical. The punk thing, I said, to hell with that. We just want to go in the garage, pick up a guitar, mix some noise.
To a large part, it destroyed heavy metal in the UK. Ultimately, I think it kind of forced it to recreate itself.
En busca de un salvador, el heavy metal encontró uno en la misma ciudad industrial de Birmingham, Inglaterra, que produjo a Black Sabbath. Eran 5 jóvenes con un nombre: Judas Priest.
In musical terms, obviously we wanted to do something unique. You had to kind of chisel out your own sort of image and sound.
Priest used to rehearse in the same studios that Sabbath used to work in. We knew that in this room, Iommi had been riffing up and Ozzy had been screaming. You could still smell that they'd been there last week. The roots of metal are very definitely within Priest and Sabbath.
As much as Sabbath started it, Priests were the ones that took it out of the blues and just straight into metal. They were the first ones that were all metal all the time. Up here in space, looking on you, my laser trace, everything you do.
When you go back and listen to some of those early Zeppelin records, they would have bluegrass songs on the record or madrigal tunes. And Judas Priest has said, yeah, that's not heavy. Judas Priest was the first band to take the heavy metal and embrace it as a term and as a music form. We're metal gods.
Formados originalmente en 1970, a Priest le tomó algunos años pulir su sonido particular, pero el resultado fue algo fresco. Una energía abastecida por las guitarras gemelas de Glenn Tipton y Kiki Downey. Y la incitante voz del cantante Rob Halford.
The riffs had that same inherent darkness that Sabbath had, but it just sounded more metallic. And then on top of that, you had Halford's vocals.
everything Halford's saying, you believe every word of it. Hell bent for leather. I'm like going, damn straight. You're right. Whatever you're saying, you're right.
Pero lo que realmente los puso en otra dimensión fue una manifestación de moda, una imagen sencilla que iba a tono con el poder de su música.
One of the cool things about Priest is that we're commonly known as being the originators of the look, the image.
When Judas Priest came along, it took them a while to find their niche. In their early days, they were wearing very flowery, almost hippie-fied clothes.
And now back to Judas Priest, and this is Dreamer Deceiver.
I remember seeing them on a British program called The Old Grey Whistle Test, when they were actually very serious, kind of studious musicians. They had none of the whips, leather and chains image that we saw today. Guitarist KK Downing was quite flamboyant, used to wear this big cowboy hat. The singer Rob Halford was in these very flouncy blouses.
We had all this great sound, we had the show, we had the lights, we had all of these great things going on, but there was just something not connecting from the visual perspective. And it was around the time that we brought Hellbent for Leather into the set list. And it was just a great epiphany.
We never sat down and said, let's all wear leather. We fell into it. I think Rob was the first, and then gradually we all started to wear the leather, and it just seemed so right.
The look, the leather and the spikes, which of course, basically came out of Halford's, the way he dressed, because he was gay, which I love.
I have been known to go into one or two S&M shops in my life. And this is only because when we were thinking about this, I had no idea where to go. We didn't have people that made clothes for us. So I would just walk around London looking for alleyways and obscure little doorways and find these places and just go in there and then have one of those and two of those and three of those. Mr. S. Leather of Soho, London. It's a place to go to.
You wanted something that looked extreme. You wanted it to be like a perfect manifestation of what the music was. I mean, we'd wear like black leather jackets and stuff like he wore. We didn't think we were doing anything remotely gay at all. But that's where it came from, and how many bands looked like that after that?
And within a short time, I think a lot of other metal bands were going, yeah, that's the way we should look too. And so it became a kind of a uniform, a recognition. If you looked at the band's photo, you knew they were metal because of all this, and the chains and the studs, and that's a metal band.
Armados de un aspecto y sonido agresivos, Judas Priest estaba destinado a empezar, pero el progreso fue lento. En el Reino Unido fueron a lo mucho un éxito oculto, y en su primera gira por los Estados Unidos en 1977 abrieron para Real Speedwagon. Pero todo cambió con su lanzamiento de 1980, British Steel. El álbum se colocó en el top 10 británico y lo más importante, consiguió tiempo aire en las estaciones de radio norteamericanas. De repente, legiones de nuevos fanáticos se alistaban para recibir a Judas Priest y al heavy metal.
Judas Priest is number one.
Oh, I remember going to the Starwood and Judas Priest was in town. It was like, dude, the Priest is here.
Priest is the best, man. Priest is the best. I'm telling you. Hey, let me tell you. Oh, Robert Halford is the best. Dingo. Wow.
went to see Judas Priest, and I got to wear the arm gauntlets, everything, spikes, and it was raw and it was real, and you could relate to it.
Heavy metal rules. All that punk sucks. It doesn't belong in this world. It belongs on Mars, man. What the hell is punk?
Priest, 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 priest.
We've always maintained we're a heavy metal band, even during the time periods when metal was supposed to be unfashionable and people were trying to get rid of the tag. We were proud to be heavy metal.
Heavy, la historia del metal.
We knew we'd established the craziest place on God's earth for rock and roll. I promise you nothing but severe pain of the ear, and I will melt you if you've got the balls to come and see us.
Heavy, la historia del metal. Heavy, la historia del metal. En cuanto al éxito de Judas Priest, gran parte de su aclamación la lograron en los Estados Unidos. En Londres, la escena del heavy metal continuaba escondida en las sombras.
There were loads of metal fans in Britain who felt disenfranchised. He had magazines writing about punk and new wave, didn't want to know about the old school, and Priest, Motorhead, AC/DC were largely included by so many people in the media as old school. Suddenly the underground scene, word of mouth, became all important. And it was at this time that the bandwagon, the heavy metal soundhouse in northwest London, came into its own, because a guy there called Neil Kay stuck to his guns.
The bandwagon was a very big pub, and Neil Kay set up a metal DJ night, and he called it Neil Kay's Heavy Metal Soundhouse.
The manager of the pub said to me, "Why don't you play some punk?" But I can't tell you what I told him, except it started in F and finished at F.
In my view, nobody should be allowed to stand on a stage unless they can actually present a total professional thing, unless they really can sing and really can play. Punk was a total anti-attitude towards music.
There was a music magazine called Sounds that I had noticed following the progression of rock. I was reading through it one day and I thought, we need some publicity. This is desperate. So I phoned up Sounds and I talked to Jeff Bart. And I said, I have got a heavy metal discotheque. We call it a soundhouse because the word discotheque sucks. Get your butt down here. I promise you nothing but severe pain of the ear. And I will melt you if you've got the balls to come and see us. Hard rock, heavy metal, heavy rock, whatever you want to call it, was my favourite form of music. And I just thought it needed somebody to speak out about it. He did a double-page expose right in the centre of Sounds the next week. All hell broke loose. It was as if the floodgates had opened. We went up from about 300 to about 7.5, 800. There was no room for half of them. They were all outside on the roundabout, on the green, everywhere. You had kids in denim jackets full of patches, T-shirts that went from Motorhead to Judas Priest to AC/DC. You kind of felt part of a community. You felt very, very special. It was also a blessed relief after being bombarded here, there and everywhere by other forms of music that you didn't really like. We knew we'd established the craziest place on God's earth for rock and roll. You had these weird, crazy things happening. People would turn up and they weren't just playing air guitar, they'd play cardboard guitar. They'd lovingly craft their own instruments. It became a scene within a scene. Rob Loonhouse. He invented the air guitar probably back about 1976. Rob Loonhouse was a regular patron of the bandwagon in Kingsbury. Mad as a hatter. Absolutely mad as a hatter. Just an incredible character. The cardboard guitar syndrome, or, sorry Rob, hardboard guitar, he objected to the word cardboard, started one evening back then when the customary amount of head-banging was going on, as it always did. Rob shoved his way forward. The next thing I see is this tall bloke, thin with a beard, and he's standing there with a hardboard guitar, and he's using it. And he's looking so good, I really believe he's playing it. The great thing was, they weren't taking the piss. They were doing it because they loved it. The next weekend, there was 10 of them. The next weekend, there was 15. Then there was 20. There was no other club like it in the country. And people came from far and wide to see this phenomenon.
Our guitar player, Randy Rhoads, left Quiet Riot to join up with Ozzy Osbourne, and he used to give me phone calls when they were recording those albums and said, "You're not going to believe what's going on over here. The kids in the audience come with cardboard cutouts of a mock-up of the guitar players, kind of guitars they use." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, like, for example, if you were to see Judas Priest, they'd have a flying V, a cardboard flying V like K.K. Downing would have."
Neil tocaba lo que los fanáticos querían oír, y si eras una banda de metal con alguna esperanza, lograr que tu demo fuera tocado en una casa musical significaba todo.
Jeff Barr took my weekly request chart. He published it in Sounds and it went worldwide. That really opened the door. Demo tapes started pouring in from everywhere. Steve Harris, Dave Murray, they came in one night from East London. I'd never even heard of them. "Here's our new demo tape, mate. Do me a favour and listen to it, will you?" And I took it home after the wagon that night, and I put it on my cassette deck, and I started getting all these goosebumps all over my arms.
He just went through the roof. He just was like blown away by this piece of music.
I listened to it, and it was the best I'd ever heard.
Neil Kay started to play it. People at the bandwagon were listening to it, and wow, this is amazing. This is great. This is a demo? Surely not. These were songs that you could headbang to. You could wave your fist to.
That was Iron Maiden's demo tape.
Heavy, la historia del metal.
When I first saw Iron Maiden, I thought, this is just fierce. I looked at the singer and I thought, I reckon I could do a better job than Hendo, you know. I mean, I should be singing for those guys.
Heavy, la historia del metal. Heavy, la historia del metal. El club del bandwagon al noroeste de Londres se volvió el epicentro espiritual de la naciente subcultura del heavy metal. Y para principios de los 80, nuevas bandas que prosperaban en velocidad, fuerza y volumen se equilibraban para anunciar una nueva era.
The new wave of British heavy metal was just really a term we invented in the office one afternoon. There were a lot of young, exciting British rock bands coming out of the woodwork, coming out of the metalwork, if you like. What I didn't realise at the time was how many of them there were.
There was Samson,
Savage, Diamond Head,
Venom,
Angel Witch, Saxon,
Fist,
Tank,
Earl School, Tigers of Pantang.
But only a few lasted a few years and had a career out of it.
A lot of those bands really didn't make much of a dent over here. Pretty much it was Iron Maiden and Iron Maiden. And Iron Maiden.
Gracias a su legendario demo, Iron Maiden desarrolló rápidamente una leal adhesión y una reputación como la banda del pueblo.
They were guys who had all owned their chops in bar bands. They knew how to play their instruments really well. They were actually offered a record deal in '76 if they'd shave their heads into mohawks and play punk music. Well, they stuck it out in the London club scene for a few years. Said, I think we've got a good thing going. We're going to stick with the Iron Maiden plan. See you in 5 years.
Iron Maiden esperó pacientemente hasta que recibió una oferta de disco que les permitía conservar su imagen. Irónicamente, cuando lanzaron su primer álbum autotitulado, en 1980, inmediatamente tanto críticos como fanáticos vieron una relación entre Maiden y los elementos punk que despreciaban.
More than any band at that particular time, they had a little bit of grudging respect from punk writers of that generation, particularly with their singer Paul Di'Anno in the lineup. They had this kind of punk metal edge that I think crossed over to a large extent.
They wrote these songs that were really complicated, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, prog rock, or Genesis, and then they had the energy of punk. So while punk bands were a lot of times just really playing three chords really fast, Iron Maiden was playing this intricate spider-webby guitar lines, and it sounded like classical music.
Like there's a lot of that in there. It's very nude.
It sounded more aggressive and more confrontational than pop music did. And if you were a very mainstream, straightforward, good person, you would not want to listen to Iron Maiden.
The timing couldn't have been more perfect when they hit. The genre as a whole was starting to happen. And here comes Maiden. Like, I've never heard this before. This is eviler than Priest. Like, that was my first thoughts hearing Iron Maiden. They're Judas Priest, but more evil. I was like, how'd they do this? How did they do this?
Para 1982 tenían 2 discos en su haber y un magnífico apoyo de fanáticos entusiastas del metal en todo el mundo. Sin embargo, a medida que crecía su popularidad, la banda estudiaba su futuro bastante más allá de las limitaciones de su vocalista Paul Di'Anno.
Di'Anno was very much a punk frontman. He wasn't a great singer, but he was right for what the first 2 albums represented. But with Paul Di'Anno, they were going to be stuck. He was unpredictable and enigmatic in a way that was not acceptable. To move on, they needed a new singer.
Where I first saw Iron Maiden, I thought, this is just fierce. God, this is good. Wow. I looked at the singer and I thought, I reckon I could do a better job than him, though, you know. I mean, I should be singing for those guys.
I left alone. My mind was blank.
They got him, Bruce Dickinson from Sanson, and a band who really weren't going anywhere.
What did I see?
Well, Bruce had a great voice, great range. He was more articulate, more dynamic, more diverse, a better lyricist and a better singer than Paul Di'Anno. It allowed Maiden to move to the next level.
Once you bring Bruce Dickinson into the lineup, you can see that transformation from a band who can get a club going, can get a 3,000 or 4,000 seater venue going. But with Dickinson on board, you're talking about, arena rock at its greatest.
Metal is vaudeville, in a way. The story, the theatre in your head, it takes over. As soon as you go on a stage, you can't be a little pinhead, so you have to blow yourself up. But if you want to be that big to somebody who's right at the back of the arena, you've got to take a real... you inflate your ego to supersized proportions. It's supersize me, and everything is big, and you don't make a gesture like that. Nobody will see it. Arms get flung, grand gestures, and the person at the back feels like you're much closer.
Con Dickinson al frente, Iron Maiden tenía la persona más grandiosa que la banda siempre había anhelado. Pero hubo un elemento particular que fue más famoso que cualquiera de los miembros de la banda. No tocaba ningún instrumento ni sabía cantar. Sin embargo, Eddie se volvió completamente responsable de proyectar la imagen de la banda y fue uno de los símbolos del heavy metal más queridos.
Eddie was the original alter ego that could express humour and irony and aggression.
They put all their fantasy, as it were, all their image into Eddie. He became the personification of Iron Maiden on T-shirts, on photographs, on album sleeves, on single sleeves.
What you've got to realise is Eddie basically started out as just a head, as a cardboard cutout on a piece of plywood.
It was more like a kabuki kind of mask and was shaped to look a little bit grotesque. And I remember seeing that behind the drummer. We'd do the set, and at the end of it, he had some fake blood gushing out the mask, and actually went all over the drummer's head. He was just covered in this red stuff.
The original Eddie didn't have long hair. They had to give him some hair so he looked like a proper headbanger.
What was the inspiration for this album?
Eddie. I might have never gotten into Maiden if I didn't see Eddie on the cover of that first album, and I looked at it and I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. Just shows you how important artwork was and is to music.
I just love the fact that we didn't know what he is. Was he a corpse? Was he a monster? Was he an alien? Because every record, he changed to whatever the theme of the record was. Killers, he's killing someone. Peace of Mind, he's in a straitjacket. Power Slave, he's in ancient Egypt. And then on top of that, when Maiden's playing, maybe if the energy level isn't as high, boom, they bring out the giant Eddie to come on stage. And I was like, oh, there's Eddie.
There was something about the image. It was almost like World Federation Wrestling. It was that kind of larger-than-life escapism thing, and slightly ridiculous. And I think that's why a lot of young kids got into it.
By owning Iron Maiden, you knew you were consuming this art and this aesthetic that belonged to sort of a darker subculture. And that was very appealing. It seemed to say, you know, you think you're alienated, but you're not. There's 2 million people exactly like you.
14 and 22 at that time by the balls and didn't let go.
La historia del metal.
I was like, 13 years old, 14 years old. I used to sell Quaaludes at Starwood, and I saw this band Van Halen play, and I was just like, wow.
If you want to talk about the strip and creating rock and roll, nobody can recreate what they did.
La historia del metal. La historia del metal.
Any band is always influenced by their environment, wherever they come from. Black Sabbath were from Birmingham, very dour, low-key, very working-class oriented, and it certainly shows in their music and their approach and attitude to life. But California, Hollywood, is glitz, glamour, glitter.
A 8,000 kilómetros y un continente de distancia de la tierra donde fue forjado el heavy metal, había un auge en un lugar seductor de distinta clase, y a diferencia de la situación industrial inherente a Inglaterra, este nuevo escenario estaba bañado de sol.
You can't get much more opposite than Birmingham, England, and Los Angeles Sunset Strip. You know, the bright colors and the spandex and the shoes and the boots and the girls.
Up to that point, heavy metal was very much about men. It was macho. It was standing on stage and being very forceful. Now suddenly it was cool to be a character again. Suddenly it was cool to be a little trashy, a little sleazy, a little sexy, as it were.
And that's what happened with heavy metal groups in Los Angeles. They took the essence of the music, but they glamified it.
Before people used the term hair metal, I remember they used to use a term called teeth metal. These are bands who smile. Van Halen created them. This was heavy music, but like the singer likes to be there.
I love talking. I love telling jokes. For me, this is just one big wet T-shirt contest, you know?
They just kind of summed up everything about the California lifestyle. They didn't go in for the trappings, you know, the witches and the mysticism in the woods. It's all about chicks and cars and good times. And they really Americanized heavy metal.
Van Halen se formó en 1974 y pasaron los siguientes 3 años puliendo sus habilidades en los clubs de Los Ángeles.
If you want to talk about the strip and creating rock and roll in LA, nobody can recreate what they did.
I was like, 13 years old, 14 years old. I used to sell Quaaludes at Starwood, and I saw this band Van Halen play, and I was just like, wow.
I used to go to see him at the Whiskey. I swear to God, I used to sit on the stage, and here'd be Van Halen flying all over the place like it was an arena, and there'd be 12 people there. I said to my guys, there's something new going down. And sure enough, Van Halen erupted.
En 1978, Van Halen lanzó su debut autotitulado. Repleto de éxitos en la radio, el álbum obtuvo disco de platino 6 veces.
When Van Halen 1 came up, everyone in Britain just picked up on it. Have you heard this album? It's so different. It's so exciting. It's so fresh. It's so not British.
If there is any design to it at all, the sound of Van Halen is meant to spill over all over your turntable and ruin the rest of your record.
When Van Halen 1 came out, it revolutionized guitar playing. Eddie played with a style that nobody before him ever had played.
Anybody who just listens to the beginning of Eruption, just the beginning, even if you're not a guitar player, the way that hits you. All that stuff just jumps out and just goes bam right in your nuts.
Every guitar player that came out from that point on, no pun intended, tapped into the Eddie Van Halen style.
Con carisma, fulgor y atractivo sexual, la popularidad de Van Halen se remontó por todo el mundo. Llevaban el heavy metal por un nuevo viaje y todo el mundo era bienvenido, sobre todo las mujeres.
When Van Halen came over to the UK, they supported Black Sabbath on Black Sabbath's 10th anniversary tour. Now, can you imagine that? Sabbath, heavy metal gods, supported by these upstarts from America. Well, what's going to happen? Well, obviously, these upstarts from America are going to get no chance. In fact, it was Sabbath who had no chance. Every night on that tour, Black Sabbath were blown off by Van Halen. It was Eddie Van Halen playing out of his skin and David Lee Roth all over the place, like a mesmerizing figure.
Nobody has seen a frontman like Roth before. Roth's showmanship influenced a whole new generation of frontmen.
He's like a Liberace of rock and roll.
David Lee Roth wanted to appeal to the girls as much as the boys, and people loved him for it.
What you see on stage with Van Halen is only what you're going to find underneath the stage. And what you see backstage is probably what you're going to find upstairs in the hotel.
They were completely populist. Van Halen was for everybody. To say you like Van Halen, I mean, that's like saying you like pro football. It was the widest possible net for a rock band to have.
Van Halen hizo el heavy metal más popular que nunca antes. Una vez dado por muerto por críticos como Lester Bangs, la escena ahora prosperaba y también la música. La tercera propuesta del grupo, Women and Children First, salió en 1980. Probaría ser el año dorado del heavy metal.
1980 was magical. It's a magical year in the history of metal.
There was a lot of goodwill for this kind of music around at that time.
Punk played itself out, and heavy metal, meanwhile, coalesced into something modern and important at that moment.
This was the year that a lot of awesome albums came out.
Judas Priest put out British Steel.
Lightning to the Nations by Diamond Head.
AC/DC did Back in Black.
Motorhead put out Ace of Spades, which was a huge deal.
Saxon's Wheels of Steel.
Great albums. Ozzy did Blizzard of Oz and discovered Randy Rhoads. So much happened in that year. And for so many bands, it was time to make their mark.
Este fue literalmente el caso para el ex-hombre principal de Rainbow, Ronnie James Dio. Tocando de soporte para Ozzy Osbourne en la principal banda de rock de heavy metal fue razón suficiente para crear su propia identidad. Nunca se imaginó que su rúbrica personal vendría a definir al heavy metal como ninguna otra cosa.
I joined a band that had a singer who did this all the time, who thought he was Richard Nixon. I didn't want to be Richard Nixon, or did I want to be Ozzy? I didn't want to be that. I wanted to do something that was special to me.
All respect.
I call it the universal metal sign.
My grandmother used to do it. She's born in Italy, didn't speak a lot of English, and had her superstitions. She stop the evil eye. I got it. Or you can give the evil eye. So you can do it. It's antenna, both ways. Works both ways. And I see her do it all the time. It's called the Moloch. It's M-O-L-O-C-H, which is a devil.
I think it's been glorified over the years into this evil satanic sign. I mean, I remember even in the decline of the Western civilization, some lady was saying it's 666. There's a 6 here, there's a 6 here.
And a 6 here, which represents the 666 in the book of Revelations in the Bible.
It's like, come on, man. I think this means I love you in sign language.
It's not just that. I mean, I found all different kind of ways to do it, to create letters with it, to do all kinds of amazing things with it.
You got the single, which is this, and you got the double, and then you got too much metal for one hand, you know?
It's like, for instance, when you say the word Slayer, when people would go up to me and they say, dude, you should play more Slayer, they never said that. They would always say, dude, play more Slayer!
Well, it was meant for a purpose. I tried to create it within the confines of the band Black Sabbath, in the evilness that was supposed to be that band. And now it's crossed over into everything.
Para 1981, el heavy metal se había transformado en una creciente comunidad con su propia identidad. Dio le había dado un saludo, Priest un aspecto, Maiden una mascota. El heavy metal tenía su propio baile, sacudir la cabeza. Cuando Van Halen no solamente lo convirtió en una fiesta, sino que invitó a venir a las chicas, el metal estaba bien posicionado para la revolución que estaba por ocurrir.
Ladies and gentlemen, rock and roll.
We're Def Leppard. There's only one way to hear us right on MTV, in stereo. Stay tuned for details.
La historia del metal.
MTV came out, we embraced it fully. We said, no, we're more Duran Duran than we are Black Sabbath.
I know fans, all they wanted to do was get a video on MTV.
Heavy, la historia del metal. Heavy, la historia del metal.
The explosion of heavy metal really did have a lot to do with the advent of videos on television. Heavy metal was a natural fit for rock video because of its emphasis on the visual.
MTV first hit the airwaves August 1st, 1981.
I'm Mark Goodman.
I'm Alan Hunter.
I'm Martha.
I'm JJ Jackson.
I'm Nina Blackwood.
MTV was the national radio station. I mean, people tuned into MTV to see the new bands.
Here you had a visual medium that was looking for something to put on the screen. And Supertramp and Joe Jackson just weren't doing it. As a matter of fact, that was the end of their careers. People got to look at them and said, oh my God, put the camera back on Joe Jackson's shoes.
Walk up the moon.
We were given a show and visually driven without the video cameras on. So MTV said, well, this is ready-made.
I would say the first band that got airplay on MTV that really broke out, that is considered in the quote-unquote heavy metal genre, would be Def Leppard.
MTV Def Leppard interview, 22/12, 1982.
Siguiendo los pasos de Iron Maiden, Def Leppard fue el siguiente gran suceso en la nueva ola del heavy metal británico. Pero ellos también poseían el brillo y la buena apariencia de Van Halen. Fue la combinación perfecta para la naciente MTV.
We weren't like Black Sabbath or Maiden. We felt it was more like, say, AC/DC or even more like the Stones. Nothing to do with metal at all, except the fact we played loud electric guitars. You know, MTV came out, we embraced it fully. I know there were some bands that go, oh no, we're radio bands and we're going to stick to our cause. We said, no, we're more Duran Duran than we are Black Sabbath.
High and Dry de 1981 fue la primera estocada de Leppard con un sonido más esencial, que ganaron al dejar su hogar de Sheffield, Inglaterra, y unirse con el productor de AC/DC, Mutt Lange, quien tenía más ideas para el próximo álbum de la banda.
Mutt Lange, who was our producer, said we should make an album that does open doors and that is different.
We had a piece of paper stuck on the wall in the studio and everybody wrote down titles. Occasionally we got a couple of serious ones.
We were trying to make something that was like Star Wars for the ears. Mutt being the musical equivalent of Steven Spielberg. That's basically what we did.
Pyromania was one of the serious ones, and everybody seemed to like it. And he did have a good image. It's a great word. I mean, I didn't even know what it meant when I first read it. I do now.
Pyromania was one of the first pop metal records, which had more of a melodic pop sensibility. Like, I remember the song that came out right before Pyromania, and it was just Joe Elliott walking around a house going, me and my wine! I'm doing fine! And then the next thing was Photograph.
Photograph came out, MTV started playing it, and it just went through the roof. They were certainly being marketed as kind of like the young, pretty boys from England, and it wasn't all about denim and leather. It was a little lighter than that. Just before that tour kicked off, Joe and Rick went down Kensington Market, and Rick Allen bought these little shorts with a Union Jack on. Joe bought this T-shirt. During the Pyromania tour, we ended up selling the T-shirts because it became such a popular thing, the Union Jack.
Yes, they were good looking. Yes, they looked fantastic in those little British flag shorts. The stars were in alignment, but we wouldn't be talking about them now if they looked good and made good videos and the songs were lame.
It was just amazing the way the stuff sounded. It was like just so polished. The records up to that point didn't have that finesse. Just hook after hook after hook. You know, you had a guitar hook. The melody in the verse is a hook. The B section's a hook. And the chorus, like, oh my God, okay, God, pull these hooks out of me.
There was metal fans that would buy about 2 million albums. And it was basically like an Aussie audience, and that was kind of hard rock. And if you crossed over into pop, which is what we did, that's when the humongous record sales started coming in. We actually went top 40. It wasn't just rock. It was rock plus.
El éxito de Def Leppard marcó el cambio. Pyromania fue el segundo álbum mejor vendido durante todo 1983, solamente atrás de Thriller de Michael Jackson.
Pyromania helped to define the 1980s, possibly like no other album. I think a lot of bands saw Def Leppard and the formula they had of making these music videos, starting to incorporate some conceptual elements into them, and tried to emulate that template. You know, you look at someone like Ozzy, and here's the Prince of Darkness running around in sequins and eyeliner and hair poofed out to here. Judas Priest started putting color in their black leather.
A lot of the bands took their influence from other classic heavy, really heavy metal bands and then lightened it up for commerciality, for MTV. That's all they wanted to do, was get a video on MTV.
Habían pasado unos cuantos años desde que los críticos predijeron la funesta muerte del heavy metal, pero cuando los 80 emprendieron el vuelo, eso fue cosa del pasado. Gracias a la rigurosa rotación en MTV, el heavy metal no solo estaba vivo y bien, estaba listo para adueñarse del mundo.
We've been told countless times that this music is dead and over, and it's a constant quest to prove that's not true. It's always going to be there at a certain level. It's never going to be dead. Never.